I wanted to make a new line. I can use another HTML tag which is called a break. And the break tag will basically create a new line in our HTML document. So I can just do a less than sign, a BR, and then we're gonna do a forward slash, and we're gonna do a greater than sign. And you'll see now when I refresh this page, there should be a space between the title and between this first paragraph. So you can see that we have this space here. And you can use as many of these break tags as you want. I can make 2 of them, and now it's gonna be even further down. So these break tags can be really good to kind of break things up. Another tag that I can use is called the horizontal rule tab. And the horizontal rule tab will basically give us a straight line right across the website that's gonna help us to separate some of our content. So I can make that tag, I can say HR, and then I'm gonna do a forward slash, and I'm gonna do a greater than sign. And so you'll notice that this HR tag was a lot like that BR tag that we used before. And this is another special type of HTML tag. So this is a tag that's called a single tag, right? So over here in this header 2, we have one tag and then we have this other ending tag. But sometimes there'll be tags, for example, like this horizontal rule tab, where you don't really need 2 tags. Like there's nothing that needs to go inside of them. And so it's just gonna be a single tag. And a lot of times with these single tags, you'll format them this way. So you'll write out the name, and then you'll use this ending sign, and then you use this greater than sign. And actually, in certain cases, you can actually just get rid of this forward slash, but we're gonna keep it in because it's like technically correct HTML. So now you'll see that instead of a break here, we're gonna have a horizontal line. And this horizontal line is basically just something we could use to break up our content, right? You could put, you could even put like another one in here and it might style it, right? So you could have like a double line there, whatever. And the horizontal rule will go all the way across the page. There's also a couple other tags that we can use to control the size of our text. So down here in this paragraph, let's say that we wanted to make one of these words bigger. For example, let's say we wanted to make this bigger right here. We can use 2 tags called big and small, and they'll actually make our text a little bit bigger or smaller. So I can do the big tag here, and I'll do the ending tag. So this works just like all those other tags where anything that goes inside of this big tag is actually gonna get bigger. So now, watch this right here. When I refresh my page, it's actually gonna get a little bit bigger, and you can see that it did. And so I could do the same thing with this is tag down here. Let's make this bigger as well, just to really illustrate this. And now when I refresh this page, the is tag is also gonna get bigger. So it doesn't get that much bigger, but you can use this to kind of control how the text looks like. Maybe you want some text to be a little bit bigger or smaller. I can do the same thing, but with small tags. So here on this my word, I'm gonna give this a small tag. So we'll say small, and then again, we're gonna end it. And now watch the my right here. This is gonna get smaller. So you can see that it shrunk a little bit. So using those big and those small tags can help us to control the size of the text on our website. We can also use other tags called subscripts and superscripts. So this can be used to format like subscripts and superscripts, especially if you're doing something like math. You're gonna wanna use something like this. So I'm gonna go over here into this paragraph, and we'll create a subscript and a superscript. So imagine that I wanted to like type out the chemical formula for water, right? We could say H2O. But this 2 should actually be a subscript, right? It should be like a small little 2 right down below H. So I can use this sub tag, and I can surround this 2 with the sub tag. And now this is gonna be like a little bit smaller. So you'll see here we have H2O, so it's formatted correctly. I could also do the same thing with a superscript. So another good example would be like math. So I could say like, maybe we wanted to write out 10 squared, so like 10 to the power of 2. I can use this superscript tag, and this will make this a superscript. So now we have 10 squared. So these are all like little HTML tags that you can basically just use to format the text on your website. And when HTML was first written, you have to understand that websites were just all textual. So nowadays we have like a bunch of images and videos and all these different things on our web pages, but generally HTML was just used to write out text, and there were some images and some other stuff, but there's a lot of HTML tags that just deal with formatting your text. So these are all tags that can come in handy, and you can definitely use them to format text inside of your paragraphs, or you can use any of these tags inside of other elements. So I don't want you to think that you can only use these tags inside of like a paragraph. You can use these tags anywhere that there's text on your website. So we could use these up here in the header, or you could use them in any other HTML tag that you want. So those are just some basic tags. Obviously there's a bunch of these tags that we can learn, and we're gonna get into more of them. But what you wanna do is really get a handle for the basics. And so this is really like the basics of HTML, things like headers, horizontal rules, breaks, paragraphs. Get a handle for the basics and practice like fleshing out different websites using only these things. And then when you move on to more complex HTML, you'll be better off for it because you know the fundamentals. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about comments in HTML. Now, comments are basically little pieces of text that you can write inside of your HTML, which will be ignored by the browser. And generally, the purpose of comments is for either yourself to read or for other developers to read. So you can write an HTML comment inside of your HTML code, and it'll be completely ignored by the web browser. But if, for example, you come back to your code later, you might leave yourself a little reminder, or you could explain what a little block of code is doing. Or if you give your file to another developer, you can use comments to give them little notes. Now I'm going to show you how you can use comments inside of HTML, and then we're also going to talk about comments best practice. So like, how can you use comments the best way in HTML? The way that you can create a comment is by using a very particular syntax. And so I can create a comment by using a less than sign, an exclamation point, and then 2 hyphens. And so now you can see here in my text editor that when I put this second hyphen in here, like the look of the comment actually changed. And that's because now we're in a comment. And so any text that I type is going to be grayed out. So this text looks different from the text out here. And basically that's just to indicate that, okay, we have now an HTML comment. One of the things I want to point out is that when I created this comment, all of the code below it turned also into this little comment. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating an opening tag for a comment. So a comment is going to go inside of these opening and closing tags. And I can close off this comment tag by using a hyphen hyphen and a greater than sign. So now anything inside of these tags is going to be a comment. And I can run these comments down across multiple lines. So I can create comments, that span a couple different lines in our text. And like I said, comments are basically just special pieces of text that aren't going to get rendered by the browser. So generally the browser's not going to look at them. They're just going to kind of ignore them. And in here you could just put little notes. So I could say like to do, like I need to work on this, or I could say don't display this. Really any comment that you want to put. I mean, it really doesn't matter. But comments can definitely be useful, and you're going to want to know how to use comments. You can also use comments to comment out specific pieces of code. So let's say, for example, that I didn't want this H2 and this horizontal rule to show up. So that's like this header over here on my website. I could take this and surround it with comments. And now this basically just won't show up on my website. And you can see because the browser's ignoring it. So a lot of times people who write HTML, in addition to using comments to like write little notes, they'll also just use comments to kind of comment out little pieces of code. So it's kind of useful, right? Because none of this code is going to get rendered by the browser now. So if I wanted to maybe try a different piece of code or try something else, I can comment this code out, and it's still going to be there inside of the HTML file, but it's not going to get used by the browser. And another thing a lot of people will do is they'll put like the reason why they commented out. So you could just say like redoing this or something, and then that would mean like you're rewriting whatever's in here, and you just want to have a backup inside the comment. So that's the basics of comments. They're really simple, but they're also really powerful. Now, one word of, I guess, kind of warning, and this is sort of like me just talking like with my personal opinion. I think when you're using comments, you need to use them sparingly. I think some people have a bad habit of just writing out like all of these, really long comments explaining things and doing things. Personally, I think the purpose of a comment is to explain something that can't be explained with code. So sometimes people will write like a bunch of messy code. So they'll write a bunch of messy HTML, and then they'll just write a comment above it being like, oh, it does this. Like, oh, this is the header. Meanwhile, the code is like, a complete disaster. It's really messy. I'm a big believer in letting the HTML speak for itself. And I think it's a decent philosophy to adopt. When you let the HTML speak for itself, you make sure that you write clean and readable HTML. And that way, when somebody goes to view your HTML document, they don't even need any comments to explain anything because it's all clear. What you don't want to be is the guy who writes a bunch of messy code, writes a comment telling what it does, because it doesn't help anyone out, right? Sure, the comment's telling me what this line of code is doing, but it doesn't help me if I need to go in there or modify it. So before you use a comment, try to explain what you're doing using your HTML. Comments are used for things that can't be explained with the HTML. And they can also be used, like I said, to comment out lines of code and, put things on hold for a second, hide them from the browser. Really, this is all just kind of my opinion and me kind of riffing about comments. But use comments however you want, and be sure to add them into your HTML files to increase your productivity. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about styles and colors. Now, one of the cool things you can do in HTML is you can actually style the individual elements. And when you style HTML elements, you can use something called a style attribute, and you can actually give each of these HTML elements certain styling information. Now, when we're talking about styling HTML, there's an entire other subject that you can get into, which is called CSS. And that stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So in this lesson, I just want to kind of give you an introduction into how you can use basic CSS to style some of these HTML elements. Now, this isn't meant to be a full course on CSS, and in fact, this Draft Academy course is really only meant to be used for HTML. We have another course that talks solely about CSS, but just know for now, I want to introduce you to the topic of styling some of your HTML. As you can see over here, I have this header up here, and then I have this paragraph here in my file. And I can actually give these two color attributes. I can color the text, and I can actually give them a background color as well. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can start adding some basic colors onto the elements for your HTML. But again, keep in mind that this isn't meant to be like a full course on CSS. This isn't meant to be a full course on styling. I just want to give you guys an introduction. So in here in this paragraph, I can pass this paragraph an attribute. So in HTML, in addition to just defining the tag, you can also give the HTML tag certain information. These are called like attributes or properties, or some people call them parameters. I'm going to give this something called style. So I type out style is equal to, and now inside of these quotation marks, I can type out some different style attributes that I want to give to this element. One of them is color. And color is going to control the color of the text for this paragraph. I can do a colon, and now I can basically just type out any color that I want. So let's use blue because that's one of my favorite colors. So now when I refresh this page, you'll notice that this paragraph over here has turned blue. And so instead of just being that boring black color, now it's blue. We could also change it to red. And now it will be red. So you can use a bunch of these different colors and you can change the color of the text. I could also change something called background color. So in addition to changing the color to red, let's change the background color to maybe blue. So now I can type out background hyphen color, and I can pass in another color. So let's make this blue. And so now this paragraph will have its text colored as red, and it'll have its background colored as blue, just like that. And so you can use these different color combinations to control the background of the text and the color of the text. And you can also use these attributes in other elements. So for example, I could use this same thing inside of this header right here. I could say style. And remember, this is just an attribute that we're passing in. I can say color, and now we'll make this green. So I can make this thing green. And I can also use these stylings on these container tags. So up here we have this body tag. I could give this a style as well. So I can say style, and why don't we give this a background color? So I'm gonna give this a background color of light blue. So I'll say background color, light blue. And now what you'll see is the entire body, so the entire body of our HTML, so all of this stuff is gonna turn blue. And that's exactly what happened. So you can use this background color inside of this body tag to control the background of the website. And what you'll notice is, even though we made the background of the body light blue, since we made the background of this paragraph blue as well, it's overriding the styling that we got from the body. So that's how you can use this style attribute in order to give your HTML elements some basic style. And if you want to learn more about styling your elements, Giraffe Academy has a full course talking about CSS where we get into all of this stuff, styling your HTML, doing all of that. But for now, if you're just trying to learn HTML, and I would definitely recommend learning HTML first, just know that you can use these basic coloring styles to change the look and the feel of your website. Now, I want to show you a website where you can go to find all of the colors that you can use. So this is a website called W3 Schools, and you can just kind of Google search like W3 Schools color list, and it'll give you a list of all these CSS colors. So again, don't worry too much about CSS, just know that you can use these inside of those style tags. So this is just a full list of like the name of the color, and if you don't want to pass in the name, so like I could say like aqua inside one of those style tags and it would color the text or the background aqua. You can also just put these hex tags in there. So you could copy this guy and put it in place of the color name and it's still gonna work. So that's just some basics on using color and styling in HTML. Again, if you're just trying to learn HTML, don't worry too much about styling, but I just wanted to show you guys like the basics of styling an element, just so you can kind of like get your teeth wet and start working with styling inside of your HTML. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using various HTML tags to lay out the structure of your website. Now, we've looked at some of these basic HTML tags, things like body and this HTML tag. We also looked at things like headers and paragraphs, all these very basic HTML tags. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about tags that we can use to format the content on our page. So these tags are going to help us to lay out the different content on our website into different sections. And really, when we're writing HTML, you want to make sure that you're using the right tags to lay out your page. One of the most common mistakes that new developers to HTML make is that they don't use the correct tags, and they don't use all of the HTML tags that they have available to them to lay out their pages. A lot of times people won't use the right tags, or they won't lay out their pages as well as they could because maybe they don't know about certain HTML tags, or they just don't feel like taking the time to use them. But in this tutorial, I want to show you all the tags that you should be using to lay out your web pages. So the first thing I want to show you is how you can start laying out some of the code inside of your body. Now, most web pages are going to have 3 distinct sections. Normally there's a header, and the header is like up at the top. And generally the header is an element that's on every page of your website. So this could be like a navigation menu. Maybe it has some branding information. So it has like the name of the website and maybe a logo, and you'd have links to like other parts of your websites. I mean, you guys have seen a website before. You kind of know what a header of a website is supposed to look like. The next section is the main section. So this is like the meat and the bones of the website, right? This is where all of the content is going to go. So maybe you would have like an article, or you might have different sections of an article, some images, whatever. It's like the main section of the website. And the third section is the footer. And most websites are going to have a footer, right? If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's some additional navigational links. Again, maybe some branding information, maybe links to like some social media pages. Most websites, though, are going to implement that basic 3-section structure: the header, the main, and the footer. And HTML has tags that we can use to define all of those sections. So here inside my body, I'm going to start by defining the header. And I can just make a header tag just like this. and we'll make 2 of them. And so now any of the code that we'd want to put in the header of our website is going to go up in here. And now over here, I'm going to make a main. And so we have these other tags, main, and what you want to do is put all of the main content of your website inside of here. And finally, we can have the last one, which is the footer tag. So footer, and again, I'm just going to close this off, footer. So we have this basic 3 tag layout. We have the header, we have the main, and we have the footer. And these are all sibling elements. So they all have the same parent element, which is this body tag. And a good practice whenever you're using HTML is to separate the code for these specific areas. So you want to put all the code for the header of your website inside the header tags, for the main inside the main tags, and the footer inside the footer tags. Inside of these different tags, we can also define certain things. So imagine that inside of my header tag, I had a navigation menu, right? A lot of times in a header of a website, there'll be navigation links. So it'll be like, here's the home page, then the about page, the contact us page, whatever. We would want to put any of those navigational elements inside of something called a nav tag. And this nav tag is used to store navigational elements. So if you had like, you know, a list of different links inside your website, then you could put them here inside of these nav tags. Now, obviously the point of this video isn't to show you like how to build a navigation tag or a navigation list. I just want to show you what you would need to use for a structure. So I'm showing you like how to structure this information. So any navigational items like maybe navigational lists or navigational links are going to go inside of nav tags, and that's a special tag inside of HTML. There's also some other tags that we could use inside of this main. So imagine that I had like a blog website, and on my blog website I had a bunch of blog posts. Well, one thing I could do would be to use what's called an article tag. So I can make an article tag, and then inside of those article tags I could write my blog post. So I could make a tag called article, and down here we're just gonna close this. And so inside of these article tags, you could put all of the text for your article, and then the browser would know like, okay, there's gonna be an article inside of here. We can also use another tag which is called a section. So generally if you're writing a blog, you might have like different sections on your website. And so we can use this section tag to break up our article, or really any part of your website, into different sections. So once again, the section tags don't have to be used with the article tag, but they just happen to go together really well, and that's on purpose. So I could say section, and we can close this off, and then any of the code for like the first section of your blog post could go in here, and maybe I'll have another section, and again we can just close this off. So you can make as many of these section containers as you want, and you can put all of the content for the section of your website. And usually whenever you have a different section, you'd want to include a header for the section. So you can include like an H1 or an H2 or an H3, whatever header that you'd want to have. Now, I also want to talk to you guys about using headers inside of your HTML documents. And this isn't something that is required to do, but generally if you're laying out an HTML page or an HTML article, you want to be careful with how you're using your headers. So generally on a web page, you want to have one header one, and that header one will be like the main title for the website. And then below that header one, you would have header twos, which would define the different sections of your website. So you might have this top header one, and then you'd have header twos, and then you'd have another header 2 down here. And then if you wanted another header inside one of those sections, you would use a header 3. So a lot of times people will recommend using headers in like a hierarchy fashion. So you'd want to have like a header 1, and then header 2, and then inside of here like another header 3. So you'd want to define the headers of your website in this kind of like hierarchy fashion. And that's not required, like it's not gonna change the performance of your website if you don't do that, but that's sort of like a best practice that a lot of people, a lot of developers are gonna use when they're designing their websites. And since we're talking about laying out like the structure of the website, I think that's good information to take to heart. Another tag that we can use to help lay out our websites is called an aside tag. And an aside tag is basically a tag that you can use for any content that's not directly related to like the main content on the page. And a good example of a scenario where you'd want to use an aside tag might be like an advertisement. So a lot of websites will have advertisements, like you might be using Google AdSense or, whatever. Like if you have an advertisement on your website, you could use an aside tag to define that. And the aside tag basically would just mean like this content is on the page and it's getting shown to the users, but it's not directly related to like the core content of our website. So those are just a bunch of different tags that you can use to help lay out your website. And I would definitely consider using the tags when you're building the basic structure of your website. One thing that a lot of people end up doing is they'll just sort of use like general container tags to lay out their website. So they won't use the specific HTML tags that HTML has defined for them to lay out their website. And one of the advantages of using these tags of, specifying like this is a section of my website and this is another section of my website, because you might say like, why do I have to define all of those sections? And honestly, like using tags like this isn't necessarily going to change the look and the feel of your website. Like you could create a header, a main, and a footer for your website without using the header, the main, or the footer tags. The purpose of those tags is, one, to act for organization. So if you're writing an HTML file, one of your goals should be to make the file as readable as possible. So when you write the file, you want it to be able to be read by either yourself later on or other developers. And when you use these HTML tags, these structure tags, it makes it a lot easier to tell what's going on, right? So I can look at your HTML and I can tell like, oh, okay, here's the header. Oh, here's the main. So this is where like all of the core content is. Okay, here's the article and I need to go to the second section. Here's the second section. It just makes it easier to read the file and it just makes the organization more organized. And again, these tags, these structural tags aren't necessarily going to change the look or the feel of the website, but they're extremely useful. Another reason they're useful is for search engine optimization. And search engine optimization is basically just how your website is viewed by search engines. So there's actually more to it than that, but that's sort of like the basic idea is like, if your site has good search engine optimization, then it'll be really easy for search engines like Google to be able to go read through your site and figure out what it's about. And when you use these very specific HTML tags, it makes it a lot easier for something like Google to go into your website and figure out the structure of your website and figure out where all of the content of your website is. When you use these HTML tags, something like Google could easily go into your file and figure out like where the article is, and it can figure out the different sections of your website, and it can figure out like how your website is laid out, and then it can use that information to display your website better. A lot of people underestimate the power of these HTML tags, and so I want to kind of instill in you guys who are watching this video the power that these tags can have. You definitely want to use things like this to lay out your websites. Don't listen to people who tell you that they're not important, because they definitely are important. That's the reason that they're included in HTML. HTML is a no-nonsense language. There's not a whole lot of fluff in there, so when HTML defines something, you know that it's important. Anyway, I would always recommend laying out your files something like this, using these different tags. If you don't want to, you don't want to, but I think it takes a little extra time, but it can really increase the readability and also the parsability of your file by like search engines. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using links in HTML. A link is one of the most popular HTML elements, and it's used to link your website to other websites on the internet. So I could create a link that would bring my users to like google.com or facebook.com, or I could link to other pages on my website. So if I wanted to build like a navigational list, I could have links to the other pages on my website that users could click and then they'd go to those pages. You can also link to files, things like images or PDFs, and you can create those links and then users can look at those images or PDFs. So I'm going to show you how to create a link. We need to use a special HTML tag called A. And after A, we need to pass this tag some information. We need to give it something called an href. And the href is basically just where we want to link to. So the easiest way to create a link would be to create like an external link. So linking to a page that's not on our website. Imagine we wanted to create a link that would go to like google.com. Inside of this href, I can just type the address to google.com. So I can say https:// And you need to make sure that you include this like HTTP or HTTPS part. A lot of times when you will give someone a link, like you won't include this, you'll just be like www.whatever. But when you're creating an href and you're creating a link, you need to be very specific about where you want to go. So you're gonna need to include this part, and then I can just type www.google.com. So what we've effectively done is told this link attribute that we want it to link to this address, which is Google. And now I'll close this, and I can actually close off this entire tag, so we can just make this closing a tag. And now inside of here, I can put any text for this link. So we could say, for example, Google's homepage. Now I also just want to point out that inside of these link tags, you can put more than just text. So you don't have to just put text, you could actually put other HTML elements. So I could put like a header 1 in here, for example. So why don't we do that? We'll make this a header 1. And now when I refresh my page, you'll see that we have this big old link over here. It's this big header 1. And when we click on it, it will link us to google.com. So I'm gonna click this, and you'll see that we get transported over to